Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the next PiP webinar series. Today's webinar is on one-off house design. And I'm Jan-Carlos Kucharek, editor of PiP and deputy editor of RIBA Journal. Nothing I've discovered is more marmite to our readership than an issue on one-off houses, which tends to elicit both censure and interest in equal measure. I was having dinner with some friends last weekend, and this month's issue became the topic of the conversation. How could we cover the work of overindulged architects by rich clients? What's to be gained from such an act when there are real housing issues that we need to address? How to house the masses in a socially sustainable and an economic way? Whether we should bring back council housing? How should we address the cladding crisis and the climate crisis with regard to our retrofit homes? In this plethora of competing and concurrent needs, what is there to be gained from analysing the homes of the rich? But then one only needs to look at the great villas of Rome, for instance, or the Villa Farnese, the Villa Giulia, the Villa Madama, not least the Roman villas, that inspired them to understand that the realm of the private home has been a site for architectural inspiration for hundreds of years, if not millennia. Let's go forwards to the Villa Savoie, the E1027 house, Pierre Chareau's Maison de Verre, Wittgenstein's house, the West Coast case study houses, Farnsworth House, the Glass House, Jenks's Cosmic House. Basically, helped by limitless amounts of cash, we find, architects themselves can realise their architectural intent in the purest way possible to produce works of art, and that's why we find them so enduringly fascinating. How it works for us minions is much like a trickle effect one gets from an Alexander McQueen catwalk show. We don't wander around in a singular haute couture piece, but you can rest assured that at some point those catwalk trends are emulated on the high street. And so aspects of one-off houses ultimately permeate our domestic extensions, causing those quantum shifts in architectural style that we see. So I'd like to welcome everyone, both lovers and haters, to our PiP One-off Houses seminar. Our first speaker this morning is Sally Storey, and she'll be talking to us about her book, Inspired by Light, a design guide to transforming the home, which I have here, and which we reviewed in PiP, the latest issue of PiP. So I'll read you a bit from that. Founding director of her own consultancy, Lighting Design International, Sally Storey has over 30 years of experience under her belt and draws a line in the sand at the outset with that expertise. Architects imagine their volumes in light, lighting designers imagine how those same spaces can be drawn from the darkness. Making the point, her intro shows 3 views of the same bathroom over a day, the last evocatively lit at night. Part 1 of the book looks at technical considerations, part 2 shows how those techniques can be applied to various spaces in the home, and part 3 sees it all employed in exemplar projects. Concisely written and with copious photographs, Storey's book proves to be illuminating. Sally's extensive knowledge and experience have led her to travelling all over the world designing lighting schemes. She's a recipient of numerous industry awards and recently received worldwide recognition with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the LIT Awards based in Los Angeles. So good morning, Sally.
Good morning, and thank you. Thank you for such an amazing introduction. And yes, I am inspired by light. I feel lucky enough to have worked in it for over 30 years, as Carlos said. And what would be wonderful is to actually share the experience with you, in that I think to me, lighting does more than anything else. You can manipulate space. And what I've tried to do in my book is make lighting more understandable and also demystify LEDs, which have had good and bad press over the last few years. It's quite hard to understand. There's so many situations where cheap LEDs are used, which then gives this horrible, gloomy feeling to space. And what's really important is actually understanding the space and using good quality LEDs. So in my synopsis today, I'm going to try and run you some of the key points of the first and second parts of the book. So you get a taster of what you could actually learn from it. And I haven't gone into the case studies because in this short presentation of 20 minutes, there isn't enough time. So if we go to the first slide, this is the actual how lighting creates the magic. Now, this to me is very important. This is a wonderful glass box. It almost looks like Fox's Glacier Mints that is by daylight lit and it seems to be glowing. But what happens at night? Just look at the difference. Do you see, suddenly transformed? If we hadn't lit it, it would be darkness outside. So we've skimmed LEDs down the sides of the glass blocks, and then we've lit the desk. But it's totally transformed. If we go back to the daytime and then back to the night, you totally understand what we're looking at. Absolutely unbelievable, the power of light. And that's what I'd like you to understand. Often it's called the fourth dimension of architecture. And I did do a BA in architecture. So I come from architectural thinking. And that's what inspires me, is actually understanding. First of all, it was daylight that inspired me. And then I thought, what can I do in the evening? So even in my dissertation, I wrote about light many years ago. If we go to the next slide, here's a room. It's a kitchen dining area, jolly nice, lit with both decorative and architectural lighting. You'd have thought that would be the normal scheme. The decorative lighting pendant over the island, it does incorporate, over the dining table, does incorporate a downlight, which focuses on it. The pendants over the kitchen peninsula, but there's no mood on it. And really it's by creating layers and depth. So if we go to the next slide, do you see the transformation? This is something we've brought light into the shelving. Suddenly there's greater depth and warmth. We've also got uplighters behind the banquette that actually grazes up the timber and gives this warmth, a far more inviting space. If you go back again, and then show you what it looks like fully lit again. Do you see the transformation? And that, as a lighting designer, is the power one has. And it's amazing to think of this tool. And this lighting tool, to me, is something that is so great. And you talk about what one can do, even in affordable housing. Just think that lighting is something that can transcend all. It can light marbles, it can light timbers, but it can also light white walls. So if we go to the next bit, which is the introduction of LEDs, I first of all wanted to bring through the idea of the circadian rhythm, which is very much talked about. It's the feeling that the light is warm in the morning, it goes to much cooler light at midday, and then it warms up at night. And this is probably one of the reasons why in the evening we want a warm light. And it's something to remember, because too often there are too many cool LEDs used in the evening which feel uncomfortable, because actually that is part of the central part of the day. And so you can see the color temperature of natural light goes between about 2000 to 5000 in the middle of the day, back to about 2000 at night. And don't we want to emulate that to get the right effects? So understanding color temperature is very important. So transfer that from daylight scenario now to an example at night. Here you can see a kitchen. In the coffer are two color temperatures. One is a 3000 Kelvin, which could be used in the day in this basement kitchen. The other is 2400 and is much more comfortable at night. So being able to have those both options mean that this kitchen during the day can be brighter, crisper, and at night be warmer and more intimate. And that flexibility is how you start to choose your color temperature. For a home, I think if you're using it, 3000 is a bit cool. 2700 is a much better color temperature for the home for your architectural lighting. And often in the evening, I might use a 2400 for my shelving or for my lamps, or even lower with some of those filament lamps. The next consideration is thinking about color rendering. Now, how often have you, as architects, gone into a space and it's lit by LEDs? With halogen, you had 100% color rendering. It looked fabulous, whether it's bright or dimmed. Now you come into a space and somehow there's a flatness. It doesn't seem right. And that's normally by the choice of the color rendering index of the LED. If you think of 100% as great, you really want to be above 95, but there are too many LEDs, particularly of the less expensive variety that are about 80 and less, that just don't render things. If you look at the artwork here, do you see those colors? They're really crisp, they pop out. That's what you want the light to do, because in an interior, when you go in and it feels flat, it's probably because the color rendering is not working. When you go into an interior and the colors pop out, just look at that red chair, it suddenly becomes alive. And probably the best color rendering index for LEDs is the TM index, which is on over 100 colors, and it really understands the color rendering of each one. But in a simpler way, we can also do it with the CRI index on 15 colors. If we go to the next slide, in very simple terms, you see what I mean by the flatness. That fruit bowl is badly rendered on the left-hand side, feels flat, you can see the colors, but they don't jump out, and well rendered on the right. So imagine that transferred to your interiors and your colors. The difference suddenly makes you want to be alive in a space and the other doesn't. So that was a little about the complexity of selection of an LED. The next is thinking about how you use lighting in a space. This is manipulating volume. We have a great tool. The same space can be thought of in different ways. In the first slide of this corridor, you see a simple downlighting, giving pools of light, leading you through, quite dramatic. The space feels quite small. It's just the floor that gets the reflected light. The walls close in on you. Change this to uplighting. Suddenly, that same volume seems totally different. And you see now the uplights reflect off the ceiling and it seems more spacious, it seems higher. And that's just by changing the way the lighting is. But often in any scheme, you want to combine both, not only to give you variances in mood, but also being able to manipulate the volume as you want to throughout the day. If you go to the next slide. So we know how to manipulate volume, and you can see this is really created by layering of light. And I began to discuss this in those first slides. Do you remember with the idea of how just having the downlights and a pendant didn't work? You want to layer the lights. And the first you see this corridor, the architecture of the corridor leading you through to the end is manipulated with small 1 watt uplights. I say 1 watt, you can see the energy consumption is negligible. It leads you to the lamp, that welcoming event in the room beyond, and the focus on the art. The next slide is very simple corridor. No downlighters, sorry, back one. The center picture was just up and down lighters within the slots, almost like architectural slots or wall lights on the side. And the other one is this old listed building with archways, where a similar concept was used as in the first slide, but this time it was the wall lights giving you the ambience in the center, but the up lights lead you through the space. Now the next slide. Lighting in the home is all about layers. I just thought this slide was quite evocative in that you've got all areas of the home in one space. A very excitingly lit staircase floating off the wall, the kitchen in the foreground, the dining area and the living room. Sometimes we do live in an open plan space. In others, they're divided into individual rooms. So we need to actually work out how best to light each space. Often with an open plan room, I think of lighting each room individually, and then I combine them to set the mood. So let's carry on. First impressions count. Now, I've been lucky enough to travel the world in my lighting experiences. So here, this is a fantastically lit house in Kuala Lumpur. You can see the soft wash of light, but I do break it down. The balustrade is highlighted, the trees are highlighted, and I've used the technique of silhouette behind the low pots. And then also the welcome by actually lighting the arches. The one beyond the tree is the one that goes into the entrance hall. The first arch you see is where the cars drive. You can manipulate where you want people to walk by drawing attention and creating balances to different elements. But I'm lucky enough to work on this very grand house, and we've been talking about things, but you can go much simpler. If you go to the next slide. Very simply, 2 different projects One is a terrace house in London. You can see it's very hard to know how to light a terrace house. The pilasters either side of this front door, the one on the right-hand side is shared, so difficult to incorporate wall lights. But actually that simple technique of those 1 watt up lights, lighting the window frame and the doorway is enough to accentuate with purely 4 watts that entrance. On the other side, on the seaside in Guernsey, we've got these wonderful rusticated walls. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is the way one chooses different lighting techniques to emphasize different surfaces. So in this situation, we've used uplights to light the actual texture of the wall. If we go into the room next time, for the next slide, we've got a very, very contemporary hallway. And this you can see is lighting of the stairs, minimal amount of downlights pooling on the artwork. But we've got this wonderful parasol ceiling that wasn't backlit, but we used its stretch that almost acts like a mirror and an LED strip either side to give that soft ambient light. Take a different interior, because the challenges of a lighting designer is changing one's techniques for different spaces. One is this hallway. The pendants in it contain the upstairs and the downstairs space. And also on the right-hand side, we have a simple narrow hall. And the lighting under the staircase, I never light on the underside of stairs, but that little spotlight lights the artwork. If you have downlights on the underside of the stairs, it looks terrible. Staircases on the next slide are my passion. They're sculptural, they're the spine of the house. You see the first one slide, it's floating off the wall. The next one, we're highlighting the texture of the stone, and the other, the lighting is incorporated in the handrail. Anything is possible. Or with the next slide, again, my thing of sometimes it's contemporary, sometimes I have a traditional space. Here was a traditional open stairwell. So a traditional light down the center gave the ambience and avoided pendants at each landing. But you could equally well do that with a decorative, more contemporary pendant as seen on the right-hand side. If you go to the next, the same techniques are considered also for spaces like the living room. Here we've got a double volume. The ambient is very much the low-level lighting of the lamps, but at high level you can see the reflected light off the beams. A linear strip placed on the beams to reflect off the ceiling gives a very soft ambient light. And there's a continuous link, not by pendants here, but by actually having lit shelves lit that take you vertically through the double volume. And on the right-hand side, instead of lighting all the shelves, we lit different elements. So each time within a space, one decides where you want to paint your brush with light. Do you want every shelf lit? That could be too much, or just individual shelves. Going to the dining room. Here you can see totally 3 different techniques. Modern pendants, traditional chandelier, but the traditional chandelier in the middle is also linked with 2 narrow beam downlights that light the center of the table. Without that, the center of the table would be lost. Or in this alpine chalet on the right, you can see a much softer light. But again, the downlights either side light the table. I hate the idea of a grid of downlights. I hate the idea of light directly overhead. But to focus on either the timber or the table, it can be inspired. The next one shows how the mood changes. Do you see this? The dining room has just the downlights there. There's nothing on the left-hand side. Introducing a soft ambience of uplight behind makes all the difference. And also the artwork being lit and the skylight. I know the next one I appreciate is kitchens. Do you see the level of detail, visual contrast with the pendants and focus over the island and lighting within the units? On the right-hand side, no ceiling lights, but that flexible wall light that focuses over the island, but also we've got integrated linear that gives the task lighting. Or on the next one, you can see we've got the idea of a listed building where we created this cove for the ambience, but all the task lighting is either over the island with that built-in extractor unit or on the shelving. So we're always thinking of ambient lighting and task lighting. And this is a common theme as we go through the house. And I know I can't share all, so the next is the bedroom and dressing room. You can see the common themes of the uplight behind the banquette, that stops the decorative lighting feeling so visually strong. Or in bathrooms, the next one. And you can see the indirect light combined with the downlights. And the next one shows another visual. I just want to explain how visually important lighting is. And I probably was one at the beginning to say to the RIBA when I was writing the book, the captions rarely count. It helps people understand what's happening. The next is unusual spaces. And that's how you deal with areas that are sloping, attics, cellars, and everything else, bringing the connection and how you do it without glaring spots. The next are fun areas. Do you see a bar with a mirror ball or a bowling alley? Those don't happen all the time. And the next is the pool, if you're lucky enough to have one. And often that goes to hospitality. And the final pool I want to share was very architectural, reflected light that gives the folded ceiling, the point sources in the pool, or in another view. You can see that colour could be introduced, but on the whole, I'm a white light person, varying between cool white to warm white, but occasionally colour can add drama. And finally, if you've been inspired, that's really what I'm all about, is thinking of different solutions to solve different spaces and hopefully inspire you. So thank you very much. I've rattled through those last slides because I wanted to give you a taster, but I know time's running out.
Thank you very much indeed, Sally. It's a fascinating book, it really is. It's very beautifully ordered, actually. I was interested in what kind of brought about your decisions for how you ordered the book.
I think first was, I felt people needed context, so hence understanding LEDs, demystifying it. Why is one LED more expensive than the other? And then the other is understanding the techniques for lighting. So when you're doing a space, an architect can think of, I've got to think of the general light, then I have which is the ambient light, then I have the feature lighting, which means you get the drama, and then you've got to think of the task in the space. So I want people to have that basis, then look at it room by room. And then the case studies was really to say, take a coherent study that you don't use every idea in every room. Depends on the context. And I think that's very important because I've become a very good editor as well as a adder of textures.
Yeah, I think, I mean, where do you think architects really slip up when they design lighting? Because I mean, my experience sometimes has been you walk into spaces and you just end up kind of bombarded with kind of LED downlights in the kind of ceiling. Where do architects really kind of get it wrong, do you think?
I think the real reason is a grid of lights is abhorrent to me. What they should do is when you come into a space, I think too often lighting is an afterthought, and that's why manipulating volume was so important. Architects often relate the lighting, the ceiling, reflective ceiling plan to the floor plan. It's done in 2 dimensions, but light works in 3 dimensions. You come in, you see the elevation. That is the key. So when you come in, you're not looking at the ceiling, you're looking what's straight ahead. So what you've got to think about is, what are the walls doing to you? Then once you come in and see the walls and how the lighting relates to that, you then begin to see the volume of the space. What's the center of the room? And therefore, you should be lighting on the center, you should be lighting the walls, and the ambience is in between.
Yes, it struck me from the image you showed of the house in KL that it really does seem as much about shadow as it is about light.
To me, I often take, one of the things you mentioned is, I think lighting starts from darkness, and then I begin to populate it with how I want to light it. So first, in my experience, I think which are the features. I'd almost take a highlight and think, these are the ones I want to emphasize. Okay, I've got my features. If you've emphasized everything, you've probably gone too far, but you've got your features. Then you think, okay, as well as the features, I need an ambience. How am I going to create it? In one situation, it could be the decorative lighting. In another, it could be cove lighting. It could be wall washing. It could be uplighting. So then I think, how am I going to light the space? But by controlling those differently, I'm able to bring out the drama of the features and dim the ambience. Or in the daytime for task operations, increase the ambience and get much more of an even light. And it's that creativity that makes you be able to articulate space.
Simon Khan is asking, what is your design method for producing these spaces? Physical models, computer-generated images, or intuition and experience?
I work very much from experience. I've done it for so long now. I go into a space and have an inherent, and I've always had an inherent feeling of space, and I've always loved daylight and things. But actually, what sometimes with houses, I probably do it entirely from experience. When I do more commercial projects, I'll often test the experience with computer modeling and things. But I think there's something natural about, like an architect who can draw with a pencil, is your innate experience from within.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sally. It's a great book. Usually when I look at these kind of books, I'm not very impressed, but I actually find the way that you've ordered this book and brought it together to be really simple, and all the ideas that you talk about are very simply expressed. And I think it's got a clarity to it that you rarely find in books of this nature. So I have to congratulate you on that one. Really nicely put together. And apparently RIBA Publishing are offering it 20% on it if you choose to buy it from the bookshop there. Thank you very much indeed for putting the book together and for your inspiring presentation today.
Thank you very much. I loved it.
Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it. We enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is now Simon Hutchison, who's a colour specialist at the Paint and Paper Library. Simon has worked as a colour specialist for the past 15 years and has undertaken historic consultancy projects, including the Museum of the Home, Newcastle Cathedral, Newton House, Somerset, the Courtauld in Somerset House, and Draper's Hall in Coventry. Using personal experience together with the science of spectrophotometric and colour analysis, he formulates colours accurately to restore rooms to their original beauty, using the details gleaned and other colours to create interiors of elegance. He has a vast knowledge of the history of colour, technical specifications, how shades would have been used, and when colours would have been initially introduced to decorative schemes. Simon, I believe you're giving an introduction to the colour palette and bespoke colours.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I'm just going to give a little overview on the Paint Library colour palette and talk a little bit about the bespoke colours that I make, and a quick sort of case study on a job that I've done recently.
Take it away.
Cool. Okay, I'll just get my PowerPoint. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for listening in to the talk this morning. I was originally going to be talking this morning from our factory in Wales. I'm working down there quite a lot at the moment, doing some production trials on something, but we decided it was a little bit too risky to drive to Wales first thing in the morning. So yes, I'm here in Manchester this morning. So I thought, first and foremost, obviously I'd introduce myself, although Carlos has done a very good introduction already. Essentially what I do really here at Paint Library. So yeah, I'm a colour specialist, so I tend to deal with all elements of colour, any scenarios involving colour. I'm actually officially part of the technical department here at Paint Library. So I formulate colours, I look at existing formulations, I work alongside the chemists as well. So I have fairly in-depth knowledge of the paint and the formulating of it. So from the technical side of things to the sort of slightly more aesthetic side of things, I also advise on colour. So I'm a colour consultant, often accompanying interior designers, architects to site on certainly old houses. I work a lot on restoration projects. As Carlos mentioned, yes, I do a lot of historical buildings, looking at old colours, and but also work on more contemporary projects as well with new builds and best ways to introduce colour into them. obviously they work slightly differently to older houses. So yeah, today I'm just going to essentially talk through the Paint Library colour card, how it works, how the colours work, how it's laid out, things like that. And then just talk a little bit, which some of you may not know about, which is the bespoke colours that Paint Library offer, which is just taking it slightly to the sort of next level. So just a quick introduction really quickly about Paint Library. For those that don't know, it was founded over 20 years ago by David Oliver. You can read this, providing inspiration, colour expertise, etc. for interior decorators, architects, things like that. We, as a standard, we have the colour palette of 180 colours, which is sort of standard card, but I won't talk today because I don't have time, but we also do obviously do wallpaper, which we do 2 collections, which is Fresco and Bottom. So the colour card, the colour card is really good with Paint Library. It's very logical, it's very systematic, very easily navigated colour. It can be sort of split into 2 sections, so you can split it right across the middle, sort of splitting it into the architectural colours and the original colours. So the architectural colours, which I'll sort of briefly talk you through first, is 95 colours, as I said, individually formulated using different strengths, same pigment to achieve subtle shades. So what this means, in a nutshell, we will start with a colour. For example, if you we hold the card, I don't know whether you guys can see this, but say page 5 there. What we will do is in theory, add equal increments of white pigment to create 4 lighter tones of that colour. Obviously, the practice is a little different to the theory. It's not as straightforward as you'd think of just adding white in equal measures up. We've got to balance off the other sort of colour pigments within it to sort of keep the hue stable. Otherwise, you find that as you actually, funnily enough, as you add white things, it tends to make things slightly bluer, so it cools off the colour. So we compensate that slightly. So, but what you do get is essentially 5 colours of varying tone, but they have exactly the same hue, which makes using them really, really easy. What you tend to find, as you can see, here's a slide of the architectural colours. What you can use them in is sort of, you can put them in any order, really. You could, I mean, traditionally, obviously, the lightest on the ceiling and then working down. So, for example, it could be plaster 1 is on the ceiling, plaster 2 is on the cornice, plaster 3 or 4 on the walls, and then plaster 5 on the woodwork. But the great thing about them is that they can be used in any particular order, and they're always going to work because they're all harmoniously linked together. So, yeah, if however you would like a little more colour in your scheme, people tend to, I like colour. I think a lot of people do like a little bit more than just very simple neutrals. The original colours, yes, inspired by historical, traditional and contemporary interiors. It's a palette of 85 colours, yes, bursting with personality and sophistication. This is the bottom half of the colour card, so you can see it sort of cuts right across the bottom here. So this is where, to be honest, where the sort of logic and simplicity of the colour card comes into play. So if you're a little worried about using colour, and a lot of people aren't particularly confident in what goes together and putting colours together, this colour card is really, really straightforward because you can essentially just work vertically on the colour card. You can, for example, I'll show you here. If we go to say Rufus at the bottom here, if you're looking at using Rufus in a scheme and you're thinking, what neutrals to put with it, all you very simply need to do is just go vertically up to the paper family, which run above it, and they will be a perfectly harmonious neutral set to work with that colour. So you can go left and right slightly from there. So, for example, if you were using, say, very well red, down here at the bottom. Yes, you could go up to, where are we? To the plaster family, but you could move over to the paper family or the marble family. So as long as you generally stick vertically, you know, it's a pretty good way to go. So obviously, I'm quite limited today. I don't have too long to talk to you. So it was a very brief on Paint Library colour card. What I'm going to spend this part of this little talk talking about is Paint Paper Library Bespoke. Now, this is something many of you may not be aware of or have not come across. Those of you who have, I'm hoping that you have found it very useful. So yeah, you know, essentially what it is, you know, the main thing says unique colours made exclusive for specific situations. So it's essentially making bespoke colours, and that's what I do, specifically for a situation. So, for example, you may find that, you know, you are on site, you were in a room, or you know, you were looking at a project, and you find that you're going through the colour card, and something, it's not, there's a colour in there that works, but it doesn't quite hit the nail on the head. You need something, it needs to be a little bit lighter, or it needs to be a little bit darker, or it needs to be a little less pink, a little more green, etc., etc. So that's slightly where I sort of come in, being obviously a colour consultant and being able to advise on colour, but also having that sort of technical ability to formulate colours sort of puts me in rather fortuitous position to be able to offer something a little bit more and offer clients that ability to, you know, make something, you know, have something very unique. So just to talk you sort of how it works. It can be anything. I can tweak colours on site, or it could be that you have a specific tile that really needs matching up. It could be a soft furnishing, things like this within a scheme. So yeah, just to talk you through it a little bit. So once I create a colour, it's catalogued, as it says, into our database for easy reordering. So everything is always, I'm quite meticulous about cataloguing it, coding it, storing it. It's all put into a sort of big database. So it means that reordering it in the future is always very easy. There's never any issues or things about formulas and things like that. It's essentially, it's there, it's stored under the client's name, it's stored under their whatever other details they want to provide. I will also then as well make a colour standard of that colour. So I do that physically, obviously making an actual drawdown, but we do it digitally, which is slightly where the spectrophotometer comes in, which is a very useful device for measuring and storing colour. So that's you know, it creates a digital sort of fingerprint of the colour, which means it can that will never deteriorate and it will be there forever. So we always have a standard to work from. So just to sort of put all this into, you know, illustrate, should I say, this, what I've just been talking about with the business. I talk very quickly on a project I did a few weeks ago, actually, down in London, and I was called to a hotel. A bespoke colour to be made for all bedroom ceilings in a London hotel. So I kind of chose this, although it's a commercial project. You know, I work an awful lot on private houses. This was a commercial project. It was quite an interesting project as well. So just really quickly, essentially what they had was they had a mock-up room that was sort of you know, on its way to being done. They had painted the paneling, as you can see at the bottom of the photo, and they'd painted the ceiling colour, but they weren't quite happy with the ceiling colour. It wasn't quite sitting right. To be honest, you can see it in the photo, but it wasn't as obvious in real life that it wasn't working too well with it. But so their initial idea was to make a slightly less pink version of what was currently there. So this was slightly unusual for me because I was actually mixing colours on site. It's not often I do that, but it's again something I can do. So I had all my pigments laid out and some base colours and things like that. And so I was mixing up paints and then painting it on. So first of all, I matched the ceiling colour and then just made it, a little less pink, which is option 1. Subtle, I agree, you can't really see it in the photo, but in reality, it did look quite different. Option 2 was a paler version of the colour used on the wooden table in the room. Yes, I appreciate you cannot see the wooden table in the room. It's not it's not hidden somewhere, but there was a table in the room that they liked the colour of, which was similar. So that was option 2. Option 3, a warmer shade to work more harmoniously with the paneling. So this was more colour based upon the paneling, and then option 4 is just a paler version of that. So in the end, they went with option 4, which is a slightly paler version. That then was agreed, signed off. I catalogued it, stored it, took the little pot back to the lab in Manchester and kind of made that up, standardized it, made a standard and catalogued, and it is there now being painted. So I'm afraid I don't have any after. I've got the before shot. I don't have the after shot because it's actually currently being done. So maybe in a few years I can, it will all be finished and be finished. So yes, that is about, I'm afraid, all the time I have for today. So thank you very much. And yes, I believe now back.
Thank you very much, Simon. You were kind of going in and out slightly with your microphone, so there was a slight kind of imbalance in your voice there. I don't quite know why, but most of it. Don't worry.
Sorry, everybody.
No worries. I'm interested really what you're finding at the moment are the main architectural trends for colours, because they obviously do change. And I was just wondering whether you're experiencing what architects are specifying now.
Yeah, so currently, you probably found a few years ago, there was a big trend towards greys and sort of cooler tones. That tends to, people are now sort of slightly warming up from that, where a big trend at the moment is stone colours in the neutrals. Those are the ones that people are, what I'm finding, are specifying much more now, because they're a much more easy to live with set of neutrals. Certainly, people found actually in this country particularly, it's grey enough already with the weather and everything, and people found that actually it's a little bit, they're a little bit cool. So obviously people, I don't think, are quite ready to go back to creams, which they were in the sort of 90s, but halfway there, we've got stone colours. They're a really good balance. They are, cool when they want to be, and obviously have that little bit of warmth. So yeah, they're a good balance. Yeah.
I noticed on one of the pictures you had a kind of a darkly coloured ceiling. Are you noticing more that architects are specifying colours on ceilings, quite rich colours on ceilings now?
Yes, they are. I think certainly over the last sort of 3-4 years, people are getting more and more adventurous with colour, which is great. People are starting to sort of break down these old conventions of a white ceiling and a colour on the wall, and potentially a white skirting board. Yeah, people are realising that it's been around. The stupid thing is, it's seen as a sort of very modern thing, to have the dark, strong colours on ceilings. But actually, when you go back and you look at Georgian fine ceilings, it's been around an awful long time. It's not been done for a while, and it's the same with things like there's this sort of trend at the moment of colour. I believe they call it colour drenching, where you have the whole room painted in the same colour, skirting boards, walls, fireplace, everything. But, you only have to go back to certainly early Georgian interiors, and they were doing that back then. It's just that, like I said, it hasn't been done recently. So there's a kind of new modern contemporary thing. It's funny how it works.
We have a question from Julie Richards at Julie Richards Architecture and Design, who's saying, are the bespoke colours you talk about available to others? I'm assuming, are you kind of making these colours up for clients?
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think I generally don't offer them out to anyone else. They are specific to that client. There's no reason why I would give them to anyone else. So no, we tend to try and keep it, as it suggests, completely bespoke. It's your color. It's available for whenever you need it on your project. So I don't give them out to anyone else.
I'm quite interested in the background behind you, because you've quite boldly kind of like completely, you've completely covered, drenched the wall with colour. So there's no differentiation really between the fireplace and the wall behind it. That's something that the idea of kind of like completely coating it. It feels like at the old firm site, the architect firm site, who used to kind of, basically cover walls with a single colour and kind of everything effectively. Is that something that's kind of on trend at the moment? It is, yeah. They're calling it, like I said, colour drenching, where you see it where the sort of the whole I mean, I appreciate that. Yeah, this is dark green and black, so they're subtly different, but yeah, it is a big thing at the moment. It's just blocking out the whole thing with one colour, and it looks very dramatic and very striking. But then, like I said, it's been around for, many, many years. It's, the Georgians were doing it, not, fair enough for aesthetic reasons, but equally for financial reasons. Is that it, back then it was actually a lot cheaper to paint everything the same color. So yeah, it's not something new, but like I said, we haven't seen it for a while, so it feels fresh, and it can look very striking, and it does look good, to be fair. We have Robert Bumby here asking, what is the new grey for windows? Which I'm not quite sure. That sounds like a kind of instinct there.
The new grey for windows. Is he talking about this sort of anthracite grey that everybody's painting their windows in? I don't know.
Well, I'm assuming, is it anthracite?
You see it a lot now. People are painting the exterior windows they're not painted in, a lot of them are UPVC, so they're sort of pre-painted in a sort of dark grey. I mean, I don't know, because a lot of it will be, made by the window manufacturer, so it's generally a RAL colour. But there's certainly the trend of dark grey on windows. It is, it's becoming more and more proliferant, everywhere. And so funny enough, though, it's again, harking back to Georgian, lead colour on windows was used quite a lot, which was a sort of mid to dark grey. So it's nothing new. We just haven't seen it in a while. That's all.
Are you sensing more people are being more adventurous with the colours of houses outside? Because I mean, I've got a street down the road from me where everybody decided to kind of paint their own colour, each house their own colour, and it makes for quite amazing kind of streetscapes. Do you kind of think that's happening?
I think people are. I think people are. The trouble with this is people have to be slightly careful, because the wonderful, colourful houses of Portobello Road, etc., around Notting Hill, they look fantastic. They do, and it's and what I tend to find is, and I have to sort of tell people to be careful, is they try and contemporize the outside of their house too much, and it looks it jars and it looks disjointed with the age of the house. If you look at Edwardian sort of mock Tudor, that sort of housing, and it's classic white with dark woodwork. People are trying to sort of sometimes make it a little bit too modern and put more stony colours in there, and they start to look a little bit odd. I'm a little bit of a purist, and I always try and keep the exterior of houses as they were when they were built, and as they were to be. Interiors go wild, but with the exterior, if you've got an old house, I generally try and keep it slightly very sympathetic to how it was when it was built.
Yeah, take your point. Well, thank you very much indeed. That was great, a great little kind of introduction to colour there.
That's okay.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody did manage to get it, make sure that the microphone was working there. We need to move on now to our next speaker, who is Tara. Are you there, Tara? You weren't earlier.
I am indeed.
Hello, Tara. It's Tara Gbolade. I believe it's Gbolade. Have I am I saying it right?
Yes, spot on.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. Co-founder of Gbolade Design Studio. Tara was a RIBAJ Rising Star winner, a co-founder of GDS and part of the Architects Declare steering group. She is an architect and passive house designer with expertise in design and planning policy, seeing her lead the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town sustainability strategy. Tara sits on design review panels, including RBKC, Lambeth and Merton Councils, and advises on major planning applications. She's a founding member of the Paradigm Network, championing Black and Asian representation in the built environment, and sits on the Public Practice Board as alumni observer and as part of the advisory committee for the Guy's and St Thomas Charity Impact on Urban Health Initiative. I believe you're talking to us today about your R house, or should I say R houses, but it's more about a way of building, isn't it, rather than a single house necessarily?
Yes, correct. It's a way of building the our home that we'll be discussing. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, if you'd like to go ahead with your R home.
I shall share my screen now, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Hopefully you can all see that and you can all hear me okay. I'm going to assume yes until told at the bottom. Excellent. Yeah, today I'll be speaking about our home, and I'll start with just running through high level the origins of the idea and where we are today with it. So the title ranges from the Riyadh house, the garden courthouse, and then eventually the our home. And hopefully I'll explain as we go along exactly why that is. This is very high level, a little bit about us, and as a practice, we aim to be design-led, community-centered in the schemes that we do, innovative and sustainable as it pertains to both environmental as well as socioeconomic sustainability, and I'll expand on this as we go on. So the origin of the Our Home actually was inspired by myself and my co-founder, our trip to Marrakesh a few years ago, and specifically the traditional Riyadh, which many of you will probably know quite well, but in effect, it's quite common in Moorish and Andalusian architecture, which accommodates a courtyard right in the heart of the home, of the traditional sort of domestic home. And a courtyard can be usually with a pool, or sometimes it's really just quite a rich garden, which acts as a central shared area for the family. It got its origin from the Persian gardens and spread through the Islamic period. It usually contains, if not a pool, usually contains a fountain. So there's always this relationship between greenery or green infrastructure and water. And it's a house, if you look at this floor plan, it's a house that's quite inward facing for the family's privacy and protection from the weather. Specifically on the ground floor, the spaces sort of pour out, so that they have all the main spaces around this sort of centrally geometrically arranged courtyard, and all the spaces pour out into it. And on the sort of first floor, they're usually about 2 stories tall. On the first floor, you have this gallery effect overlooking the courtyard. And we found this really fascinating as a typology. And what for us was interesting, we started to think, well, how do we bring this type of typology into the traditional London sort of Victorian vernacular? So specifically keeping within the constraints of, say, 5.5 meter wide and 10 meters deep. What does that look like in a different context? What does that start to translate to for a different typology? Some of the main challenges, of course, we wanted to address were ensuring that we maintained the NDSS, the National Described Space Standards, still, and additionally, we were quite keen to look at different solutions for how we start exploring the idea of addressing the gap sites across many parts of London that you'll no doubt know. And if this type of home could start to be a solution for certain types of narrow but deep sites. So it's a self-initiative project, and a few years ago, well, a couple of years ago, it was shortlisted for the British Home Awards as well. So taking those constraints of 5.5, and what we did was extend that to about 11 meters wide, so keeping within this gap that we saw and we wanted to ensure we retained. We incorporated this garden courtyard, and that's where the R home comes from. So R referring to Riyadh, which means garden or garden courtyard. So we have this courtyard right in the heart of the home with the main living spaces, so living room, kitchen, office space. So we were already thinking of working from home at the time, spilling into this shed courtyard that could be cornered away, and it's a two-story void. The key aspect here is that the courtyard also acts and doubles up as the dining room. So the kitchen very much, breakfast bar very much spills into that dining area. So the courtyard actually forms part of the GIA rather than in a traditional Riyadh being a completely separate space that did not necessarily need to be lived in, but really just for enjoyment. And so this forms very much part of the everyday movement of the home. That was a critical aspect for us, of course, because we were thinking about how we live today and how we can start to foster more family interactions with daily life. So creating opportunities for incidental meeting, which often happens around the stair core in our current traditional homes. But here we wanted to bring that idea of the garden inside and therefore create this space that allowed incidental meeting from moving from one space to another, up and down the stairs as well. We also looked from the outcome to the upstairs in a second. We also looked at the idea of how this can easily be translated from a single home to, say, a semi-detached, adapted to a semi-detached, or indeed a row of terraces, and how it might be able to push and pull as layouts change or family desires changed. As we come onto the first floor, we retain that courtyard feel. So this is that void that we have, and this particular layout accommodates 3 bedrooms with a central corridor that overlooks the courtyard space. Over time, thinking about adaptability of the home as families grow or change or want different ways of living, we see this space as something that could be filled in over time, whether that's partially filled in by, say, a study, or depending on orientation of where it's located, fully filled in, as in this layout, with another bedroom, which could be a single bed, single or double, depending on context again. From the outset, we knew we were making or designing a house type that needed to be as sustainable as possible. As highlighted in the introduction, we're very keen to look at not just the environmental aspects of sustainability, but critically also the socioeconomic aspects of sustainability. So as far as environmental goes, we of course have adopted a fabric first approach, and I'll expand on the construction methodology in a moment. But we looked very much at a fabric first approach, ensuring that we could meet up to Passivhaus standards as we needed to. The courtyard has the opportunity to be closed off or left open, so potentially open to the elements, depending on the weather, and that would be that would have sensors on it in terms of the retracting roof lights that closed or opened accordingly and according to the user's needs and requirements in the home. Thermal comfort, of course, being a critical aspect, and that aspect of the roof light being able to negotiate that as well. And then from the outset, we decided that we'd be using CLT, so panelized system, for the construction methodology, which I'll expand on in a second as well. Economically, the fabric first approach really allowed us to ensure that we were reducing massively the energy bills. So fuel poverty is something that we wanted to build out from the outset, but thinking about fuel poverty from the outset. And so thinking about what our energy bills could be. So moving away from the, say, 1,200 per quarter as we're used to £120 per annum, and then using also our solar panels or PV panels for an opportunity to gain some of that money back as well. And then the critical aspect for us as well was this idea of placemaking and the physical and visual connection that the courtyard space allowed, with the opportunity, you can just about see the folding doors there, with the opportunity to open up completely. So this reads as one whole space, including the courtyard space, or of course close off, but still be visually connected to that central space, which the family can adapt and move in a way that works for them. Again, from the outside, just thinking about a panelized system. So using timber specifically for that. So we're ensuring we're having low embodied carbon, but also the potential of this home actually acting as a carbon sink itself. The panelized system not having any finishes on it itself. So actually the timber and the CLT is expressed internally, and as you move through, specifically in the courtyard again, as you move through the building. Also, we were quite keen that, because we're looking at the option of potentially these being located in gap sites, that the facade has the opportunity to change and adapt depending on the planning context, and having that versatility that we know now exists with offsite construction in the industry. This starts to show some of the illustrations of what the courtyard space specifically starts to look like, particularly for the bedrooms. I think here we were looking at how yes, of course, we have normal windows front and back as you'd expect, but how there's this opportunity for borrowed light from this courtyard space as well. So it vastly improves the quality of living, the quality of life that the users and family people of the home have. The staircase comes straight off the courtyard. So again, ensuring that there's this visual or physical connection always as you move through and around the building, and the building typology with our connections to both of our kitchen breakfast through to dining or open space, and giving that flexibility to the homeowner and user for how that space is used. This shows a different view of that, and you can start to see what that borrowed light can look like. So even when the curtains are drawn, and this has the opportunity, I guess, depending on user choice as well, to be as high or low as required. So sill height gets the opportunity to change as well as required. But this idea of this corridor on first floor being open, both to the elements as depending on the weather, of course, but also straight down into the courtyard, ensuring that connection through. Starting to put this in context of, say, a small development, so coming out of the gap site and coming into a smaller development, what that looks like, particularly when we start changing facades. And so a very simple static typology actually can start to look quite different when we're looking at whether we're using brickwork or timber, how much glazing, manipulating how much glazing we're using, and the idea specifically of creating community from this particular house type. Here we've stretched that option a little bit more and extended the heights, for example, so we're creating that variation as we go along. The idea of our home being a courtyard type living, we thought actually if we expand upon that and bring that to the sort of wider development, and actually the development itself is a sort of courtyard living situation where the houses are surrounding this central courtyard or green space, giving the opportunity, of course, for natural surveillance as well as passing and passive surveillance, the opportunity to encourage sustainable movements, whether whether that be walking, cycling, the incidental meeting with your neighbors. So again, having to come through this central green space in order to move on to further journey to work, school, etc. But also the opportunity for this space to be fully owned by the residents around it. So they get to decide what happens in this space, whether they're having a TEDx local that's outside, whether they're having a silent cinema in the courtyard space, but that's typology, giving them that private courtyard space as they need to, as with the original Riad homes, and then this more shared sort of community space that they get to have as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tara. Just interested there, how much have you looked into the costings of the R home?
At a very high level, and at a very high level, we're looking at about 2,500 per square meter. And that was, to be fair, a couple of years ago now, so I'm sure things have changed considering our markets at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of interested in costs, for instance, of like particular elements, for instance, the retractable roof light. I mean, are those kind of exorbitant? What's your experience of those costings?
That is an additional cost. So we can, what I didn't show was the sort of basic package, if you like, would be fixed, and then that retractable roof light comes when a user requires it or wants that. Otherwise, it's a more standardized fixed roof system.
All right. So as a basic model, it would just be kind of fixed glazing over the top.
Correct, exactly, and then we have the option of it being retractable as well.
All right, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of I mean, in the latest PiP, we had a Hannington Road project in London by Matthew Giles Architects, and they've kind of pulled the building away from the flank wall of the neighbouring properties. They've kind of done the infill, but they've done exactly what you did there, which was kind of glaze over the top to create a double height space away from the flank wall of the neighbouring house. And it's created a really dramatic kind of double height space internally, which releases a whole load of kind of novel ways of using that space in the way that you overlook it. They've now got a study space, the bathroom window kind of looks out into this internalized space. And where you previously thought there might have been restrictions in that kind of arrangement, actually it seems to kind of create new relationships and kind of interesting adjacencies of spaces which otherwise wouldn't be connected in any other way. Are those ideas that you were kind of thinking about when you were producing the R home?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think for us, it was really critical to start thinking about how we as humans and family members connect more, really. So the thinking really hard, I guess, about the quality of light we bring into our space. And also this opportunity, as you've just rightly highlighted, the opportunity to not necessarily come in through the front door and run upstairs, perhaps, but being able to bump into whoever's sitting downstairs in the main space, but also a space that draws people in. So not everybody's locked away in their rooms doing their private things, but there's this natural desire to come to a sort of light-filled space with that green infrastructure, perhaps. Again, it's obviously bespoke to each family user, but there's this sort of natural desire to come into this shared space to connect more deeply with each other.
It's an interesting, I mean, you mentioned about how it can be changed in the future, and it's something I kind of picked up, but Robert Toy has picked it up here. He's saying if houses are terraced, if the courtyard is subsequently built over to provide additional accommodation, as you suggested, where you said you produce in a single room, for instance, how would that ground floor space then be lit and ventilated? But I think what you showed in that earlier image was that you still retain an element of that openness. You just kind of close over on one half of it, don't you?
Correct. Yes, you can close over on one half, or when you do, if there is a desire to say close over the courtyard, those are usually retained for where that house type is on the end of the terrace or on the end of a semi-detached. So there we'll be using sort of more traditional windows, if you like, in those spaces, rather than having sort of that particular typology for a central terrace. So whereas for a central terrace, there's this idea of closing off just part of it.
And one last question. Just for me, actually, I was interested in, I mean, obviously Urban Splash have looked into the idea of kind of modularized homes. They've kind of done a tie-up with Japanese modular home manufacturers. How do you see this? I mean, have you had interest from the industry? How are you kind of moving this idea along?
We're still definitely exploring how we move it along, but we do think that absolutely the industry has no choice but to continue to adapt. I mean, modern methods of construction is hardly modern these days. We're so used to the concept. We're so used to this way of build. We just in the UK haven't done it as much, although it's starting to pick momentum, particularly with housing associations, larger developers, larger housing associations. We visited actually the scheme in Birmingham, which I think is Urban Splash. I forget the name now, but it's the quite famous one. And those spaces internally are absolutely fantastic in terms of the air quality. They're all off-site, of course, as we're aware, but the air quality because of the MVHR systems, the really tall floor-to-ceiling heights, which bring in a lot of light. The staircase is centralized and doesn't have natural light to it, but the spaces are incredibly generous. And I think this way of living will just continue to grow. This way of construction, our methodology will continue to grow. We need to change as an industry, as we're well aware. And traditional construction is just something that really needs to be phased out sooner rather than later, particularly as we try to meet the requirements of housing production in the country.
Well, as you say, yes, I mean, the whole idea of how we're going to kind of meet our housing need, I think all of these ideas are going to have to be brought together. And I think the idea of modularized homes, as has happened on a large scale in Japan already, is the way forward for us, really. And how best we do it is obviously the key question.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Tara.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we are now moving on to Will Wigfield, who's product manager at Building Envelope at Rockwool.
Good morning.
Product manager Will focuses on new product developments, hoping to bring to the market non-combustible flat roof, external wall and facade insulation solutions. Will leads testing and certification programs to ensure existing product ranges continue to deliver required fire, acoustic and thermal performance. And with specialist expertise in building acoustics and noise control, Will regularly talks on the role of quality acoustics throughout the construction industry. Will, I believe you're actually talking about tower block refurbishment. Having watched the recent play at the Tabernacle on the Grenfell inquiry, obviously it's a matter which is of great import to architects, and you're going to give us some enlightenment on that issue.
Yeah, sure. If I can just share my screen a sec. There we go. Does that come up?
Let me see. Yes, you seem to be fine. Yes.
Good. Okay, good morning, and thanks for that introduction. So, a bit of a tangent from One-off Housing Design, but linked to refurbishment nonetheless. I was asked to speak about a project that Rockwool and Rock Panel worked on not so long ago in Birmingham, called the Crofts. Now, what it consisted of, there we go, so it's 3 social housing blocks. They were owned by Sandwell Metropolitan Borough Council, contained 270 homes, but they were built in the 1960s and they were looking really run down, both inside and out, signs of physical wear. It didn't help that the roof leaked regularly. Now, they were very hard to heat. The walls actually had no insulation at all. The windows, they were all single glazed. They had these balconies that were all open and very drafty, all of which added up to homes that were very, very hard to heat. And there was a lot of fuel poverty there as well. I mean, in terms of deprivation, the ward that this area was in, I think was ranked 12th most deprived out of 326 areas. So yeah, the council decided something needs to be done. But I mean, not only that, they wanted to also offer some kind of an aesthetic improvement as well to boost the local area, to create, to turn these homes into somewhere that people could be proud to live and call home. So if you look at what they decided to do about it, they awarded a 2-year, £11 million contract to a specialist contractor called Keep Moat, and there was a raft of measures they looked to introduce to improve the blocks. So the first thing they wanted to do was turn that the leaky flat roof into a pitched roof to convert it to create more communal space for the tenants. They also looked to install solar panels. The windows were upgraded to double glazed. The drafty balconies I mentioned, they were converted into sunrooms, which were better for the residents. They were also able to convert them back into balconies if they wanted, because the kind of window they put in could be fully opened if they desired. And they also removed some lingering asbestos as well. But the main measures that kind of helped with energy saving was the new ventilated cladding system that they chose to put on, which combined non-combustible insulation in the form of rain screen duoslab from Rockwool and non-combustible cladding from our sister company, Rock Panel. Now, one thing I show you as well is that all the residents were involved in discussions about what was going to be done from the start, which was really important because they felt that their opinions were valued. They got input on the aesthetics and the material choices. So it fostered a real sense of ownership in the community that lived in these blocks. So if we look at the result, so there was a massive energy performance improvement. It led to reduced heating bills, which then led to reduced fuel poverty, which has a knock-on effect with improved living conditions. It gives people a better quality of life, improved health outcomes as well. So that was great all around. In terms of the environment, the council estimated that 9,600 tonnes of carbon emissions were saved annually. And the project was the recipient of 2 corporate social responsibility awards as well. And yeah, the aesthetic improvement to the area was huge. So the area got that boost that the council wanted to give it. And this was all noted by the leader of Sandwell Borough Council at the time, Darren Cooper, who noted how proud he was at the work they were able to do, noted the massive visual improvement on the appearance of the blocks, and also obviously the reduced fuel bills for the tenants as well. So just to look in more detail now about the products that were chosen and why they were chosen. So if we look first at Rock Panel, our sister company that makes cladding. Oh, sorry, is that frozen? There we go. So yeah, so the process for rock panel manufacture is very similar to Rockwool. So it takes the same volcanic basalt rock from the ground, which is replenished 38,000 times more in volume than we actually use it. Melt it back into the liquid state in a furnace at 1500 degrees C. And that liquid rock is then poured onto a cylinder that spins really, really fast. And as it flies through the air, it cools and forms these strands, which are then cooled and collected and would be formed into Rockwool. In this case, it's formed into Rock Panel. So a small amount of binders added to keep the fibers together, and then it's compressed under high pressure to create these high density Rock Panel boards, which can be shaped into different given different finishes and brought to market. So the most important thing the council were looking for from the cladding and insulation combination was that they had to be non-combustible, which Rock Panel is. It kind of echoes its raw material. Rock doesn't burn, neither does rock panel. It also gave them a lot of design freedom. So those residents, when they were able to choose the aesthetic finish of the building, they had over 200 colors to choose from. In terms of installation, it's a lightweight product. It's easy to install and cut on site with standard tools. Sustainability was another important thing the council brought up. And they were pleased that the product is pretty much almost 100% recyclable and has been proven in service for up to 60 years. And as part of that, you need the kind of durability to back that up. The product itself is color and UV stable, insensitive to moisture, and it has a lower thermal expansion than a lot of other cladding products. And what that allows you to do is to create designs with much thinner panel gaps, which looks a lot tidier. So moving on then to the rock wall, the insulation that was used on the project. That was a product called Rain Screen Duo Slab. And again, the council were looking for similar things from the slabs they were the cladding. So they wanted it to be non-combustible, which it is. It's Euroclass A1, which is the highest rating you can get. It's again 97% recyclable. So another concern they had, though, was that there might be a delay between the insulation going up and the cladding going up. Now it's very resilient to wind and rain because it's a dual density product, which means that the top 15 mil of each slab is made to a higher density than the remainder. So what that gives you is a really robust outer surface for resisting wind and rain before the cladding goes up, and also resisting overdriven fixings as well. And a more resilient underside that can take up any kind of unevenness in the existing substrate that it was being applied to. Also, the product's breathable, so there won't be any problems with condensation, and it's also sound absorbent, but I'll get onto that a bit later. Now, obviously, one of the main things about an insulation is it has to perform thermally, and it's important to get the thermal performance that you specified. So to support that, well, if you look at rain screen cladding systems, the brackets that run through the insulation, they have a more complex heat flow that can't be modeled by sort of standard U-value software. So what you need to carry out is three-dimensional thermal analysis on them. Rockwell have carried out this on a range of different bracket types and materials with our insulation as well, to get to support the most kind of accurate U-value that you can get. And if you happen to have something that's not something we've got covered already, we can facilitate bespoke modelling if required as well. But just to touch back on the acoustics, one of the benefits the residents noted post install as well was how much quieter it was, how much reduced traffic noise there was. So I should say as well, this area was by one of the main arterial routes into Birmingham as well. But the system chosen, it did a great job of blocking sound. The mineral wool rain screen duo slab, it's like all rock wool products, it's sound absorbent, but again, the dual density kicks in here and offers an additional benefit. It kind of, to put it simply, it kind of confuses sound waves a bit more as they try to go through with the mismatch of the two densities there. And I think I'm still right in saying we're one of the only manufacturers to have full in situ third-party test data, acoustic test data for through wall construction, getting up to 62 dB with different cladding types, rock panel included. And just to sum up then, rock wall and rock panel, we can provide dedicated technical expertise. We have an in-house team of fire engineers to support with fire stopping and fire protection, and that sort of thing. Dedicated sales support, learning and training. We've got a full and growing library of CPDs that can be requested. And in addition to that, a lot of them are being converted now to on-demand CPDs. So, you can choose, you can either get someone to come down and deliver that to you, or you can watch a narrated presentation online on our website. And of course, here we still have a range of tools as well, like the U-value calculator and acoustic calculator as well for a range of constructions. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Will. I was interested in, I mean, you mentioned this idea of community engagement. I'm kind of interested in how much in reality you feel there is direct engagement with the communities who are affected by these recladding projects.
Well, I mean, it varies. I mean, this project actually predated Grenfell, as it happens, and there was a full engagement for this one. But you're right. In a lot of cases, some of these changes can feel foisted upon residents, and I think that was part of the problem in the run-up to Grenfell as well. That perhaps there wasn't enough, in all cases, engagement with the people who would actually be living with the changes that would be made to their buildings.
Yeah. I mean, I was wondering if theoretically, because you're talking about the number of colours, and you said, you know, residents could get to choose their own colour, but it's very difficult for actually any one or two colours, for instance, to be picked upon when you're asking 200 different people about their colour choices. So it tends to be by majority ultimately rather than ultimate choice.
Yeah.
Do you think theoretically, I mean, could it be done so that actually owners could pick their own colours for their own flat and you ended up with something completely kind of random?
Mosaic kind of thing. That would be one way of doing it. I'm not sure if the overall outcome would be as aesthetically pleasing as maybe a unified approach, but yeah.
Doable though.
I guess it would be.
We have a question here from Jennifer who says, could we know more about how to recycle rock panel? Is there a return scheme or are third parties already doing this?
I can speak more for rock wool. We have a collection service now where we can come and arrange for collection of offcuts, material that's reached end of life in sort of demolitions, and we can bring that back and recycle it into new material.
And what about the rock panel?
I'll have to, can I get back to people afterwards on that? I work for Rock Wool, so yeah, I'm not too up on that.
Yeah.
Recycling, but I can find out certainly for you. I'd imagine it'd be a very similar process.
Yeah, because obviously the recyclability of materials is something, you know, that, you know, it's part of the cycle of recycling is actually, people are far more interested in it now, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Will.
Thank you. Cheers.
We are slightly running over, so we will reconvene at 10:35, that gives 7 minutes, and we'll all be back. Do come back. We have a wonderful little scheme by Tonkin Liu to show you. So if everybody could come back by 10:35, please. Welcome back, everybody. Our next presenter is Mike Tonkin, co-founder of Tonkin Liu. He's a qualified architect and landscape architect. He established his practice in 1989 and founded Tonkin Liu with Anna Liu in 2002. Their practice has been informed by distinctive pursuit of form and lessons observed from the natural world and the vernacular architecture observed during extensive travels. Over the last 20 years, Mike has taught and lectured at the AA, the Bartlett, Cambridge, Bath, the RCA and the University of Westminster, and is currently undertaking a PhD on innovation and placemaking at the University of Bath. I think the last thing we covered of yours, Mike, was an incredible looking stent that you designed, which we ran in our extreme spec in PiP, and it was an amazing application of architects thinking on the, you know, the microscopic and the medical level, which is something which I don't think I've ever quite seen before, and probably won't see since. You're talking to us today on your water tower at Norfolk, which has been longlisted for the 2021 RIBA House of the Year. It's a landmark in the village of Castleacre and saved in auction, I understand, from the bids of a scrap metal dealer. And you've turned it into a beautiful and quite unique home. I look forward to hearing all about it.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to Mervyn Rodriguez was the engineer who worked with us. For project architect was Alex Woolgar, and the clients were Dennis Pedersen and Monsieur Kucharek. And Dennis had a kind of taste for water towers and also a sort of taste for Thunderbirds. So when he said he had bought a water tower, I didn't expect it was going to be this one, but I'll show you the context first of all. So this is a map of Castlelake, which is really interesting because it has quite a lot of ruins. So it has a Norman castle at the bottom, that's the round thing in the bottom right. It has a priory and it has a Bailey Gate and a really interesting pub. So this is the castle, excellent castle. This is the priory, lots of big blank walls and lots of small openings. This is the prior's study, which is a beautiful oriel window that faces north. These are the spiral staircases that help hold up the building. And this is the Bailey Gate. And then the Castlelake event fourth ruin was basically the water tower. So it was a sort of steel water tank, and that's what was surprising, because I imagine when Dennis first mentioned it was going to be brick. So I'm going to tell you the story of how we kind of converted this, basically. So it's a story about four spaces, really: the tank, the frame, the bridge that connects the frame to the stairs. So I'm just going to go through and describe each one of those spaces and how holistically they all come together as one space, one series of spaces, and with different experiences of nature. So as I said, Dennis, one of the other really interesting spaces in Castlelake is the pub, the Ostrich, which has a sort of 16th century hall in it. And Dennis, once he bought the water tower in auction for £20,000 with the land, he then got to know everybody in the pub. And what's fantastic is he really engaged that community. So a lot of the project was actually built by them. So I'm just going to run you through the various spaces. So here is the kind of rusty hulk, but a lot of the planners thought should have just gone to scrap metal. And that's what Dennis was bidding against, basically. The tank itself, when you went into it, was really amazing. It's kind of rusty and it had this sort of top light. And it had all of these rods that were stopping it from expanding outwards with the pressure of the water. And the load of it was something like 40 tons. And so when it's full of water, basically it's kind of all obviously on a kind of level, a sort of leveling device. And when you're in a building on the top of a hill like this, you'll really got the best view of the horizon you're ever going to get. So when we were going to kind of make an aperture in the water tank, it really felt like the right aperture to make was one that went all the way around, not a sort of normal big window. So that's exactly what we did. We just sort of cut a hole, and that hole was cut with the help of Mervin's ingenious engineering that basically put a truss above and below the window, and then the load is taken through the window frame. So that's what you're looking at here. So there's a rusty old tank. The window frames are the grey thing in the middle, and below it and above it is the truss. That's Harry, who with Dennis, was one of his four sons, and they basically, once the scaffolding was there and the window frames were in, they then basically just went around with a sledgehammer and knocked out all the panels. And Dennis described how that was a kind of sort of radical moment. And when they were all taken out, there was this sort of thing of this floating space. So you were completely connected with the horizon, but you were still inside this rusty tank. And then the floor got put in because we needed to put back as concrete. And then the other thing was we wanted to put a roof on, and the roof has solar panels on. And then you're just seeing on the right there, there's a skylight. And the skylight basically is there because we wanted to bring enough light into the middle of the room and connect you with the sky. So because you're looking only at the horizon. So Dennis took this video. So the skylight's surrounded by 4 mirrors and a light all the way around at the top. And no matter what's happening with the light, you always get these interesting shadows and reflections in the room. But what the skylight really does is it brightens up the light on those dark coloured panels so that the inside of the room is always bright. And there you see the light being bounced around all over the place. So that's the sort of story of the tank, and you see the kind of cut through the tank there. And obviously being on top of the tank is a really beautiful experience too. So to talk about the frame, so the frame is the kind of infill. So the frame was basically just a very, very slender frame that supported this massive load by these braced bays. And it was full of kind of all of the sort of equipment that went into serving the water tower. And an awful lot of that actually was then reused. So you'll re-see those ladders in a minute. So the frame was sound, although it was rusty, so it needed to be cleaned back and fireproofed. But when we talked about filling the frame, it was about building a relationship actually with that field that was to the north of the site. And the reason for that was that in this picture here, you see that's a relationship to the village. And that's not necessarily the best view. The best view was actually over this massive barley field, which when we first went to site, you just sort of saw it blowing in the wind and you thought, well, that's the most beautiful thing about the site is actually the barley field. So we designed it so that it looked out into the north direction. And then the whole tower was then clad with kind of, this is a recycled aluminium. It looks like galvanized Wrigley tin, but it's actually recycled aluminium. And it's quite bright in color. So what's quite nice about that is it actually sort of reflects the light of whatever the day is. So there are the windows, they're all just pointing north, so away from the village, so no light pollution, and just focusing on that, the view of the field. So if we go into the frame on the ground floor, it's a kind of garden room that looks out onto the kind of lower level of the field. And you can see it's all lined basically in cross-laminated timber, because the cross-laminated timber was used because we could use it structurally to stabilize the frame. Because although the steel frame is good at supporting a tank full of water, it doesn't matter if that water tank moves around in the wind, but actually when it's a house, actually that does matter. So this is a plan inside the tower of one of the bedrooms. So the bedrooms are in the tower, so you sleep in the frame of the tower. So there's a bedroom with a bathroom behind it and then a mezzanine over the top of the two. So it's a very tall space, it's almost sort of cuboid-like space. And the ladder you saw before is then used to get up to a kind of platform. And the CLT is kind of exposed on every surface and on the ceiling as well. And that's the platform. And then that's the view from the platform, which takes you even higher. And there's a window at high level, and then there's a window at low level. That was the window you saw on the other side there. And then there's a small window in the bathroom. And the bathroom is kind of the only place where there's any kind of colour. There's no paint in the whole project. Dennis was keen for everything to be kind of what it was, the materials as they come. The bathroom is actually made of fiberglass, so there's almost like sort of small capsules, and they have these little windows that give you ventilation as well. And we tried to make them like kind of castle windows that were they're standard Velvac windows, but you don't see the frame because we took the internal claddings past the frame. So there you see the kind of rooms, the sort of timber rooms, sort of barley-coloured rooms, but look onto the field of barley. And you see the tank above. So we've kind of done the frame and we've done the tank. So I'm just going to talk about the bridge quickly. So the bridge connects the frame to the tower and to the stair tower. And the stair tower there is there to stabilize the main tower again. So although the stabilization happened below, but we wanted to make it out of glass because it faces east and west. And we wanted it to connect you to the trees as you pass from one of those spaces to the other. And also it connects you to the sunrise and the sunset. So the building's quite blank from the back, or very blank from the rear. But when you're on the bridge, you're very much kind of engaged with the nature that's around you. And very much, and that's about the sort of changing seasons. That's where you're kind of very exposed, and somehow you feel like you're part of that kind of landscape as it changes over the seasons. So that's the bridge. And it didn't really need, because it faces just east and west, it does get hot, but all the air that goes into it goes into the stair tower. And then the stair tower then takes all that air up to the top, and I'll explain that in a second. So when you're on the bridge, it feels like you're moving outdoors to go back indoors again, as you're suspended in space as you walk through the sort of galvanized over the Wrigley tin wall, and then into the rooms opposite for bedrooms. So just to sort of tell you quickly about the stair tower. So the stair tower, like I said, we needed more kind of stabilization. So the stair tower acts like a stabilizing device for the whole thing. So it holds the tank at the top, and it's connected to the base at the bottom. We reused the existing foundations for the existing building, and then we just had to build some new foundations for the stair tower. So the stair tower is, like I said, very blank towards the back, and Dennis then put a clock at the top, sort of giving back something to the village, because we didn't want any light going in the direction of the village, as I was saying before. And the stair tower itself is built as a sort of kit. So Mervyn calculated that it's 4 stories tall, and the thickness of the walls could be as little as 80 mil panels. And then those 80 mil panels are actually made strong by the staircase. So like a sort of Georgian staircase that cantilevers out of a wall, it works in exactly the same way and creates something we call a compression spiral. And that compression spiral delivers the loads down to the ground and gives stability back to the whole project. So the stair is actually making it stiff. And these were all, so this is the one element that actually came, not locally, but it came from Austria. And Dennis, to make the project affordable, Dennis actually became the main contractor. And acting as the main contractor, he then kind of employed the services of people who were nearly all local. So although this wood actually came from Austria, the people who put it together were all from within a very sort of few miles from around the site. So Ben and Nigel were the kind of main contractors, and they built this staircase from top to bottom in 3 days. I think Dennis said maybe 4 days or something, really fast anyway. And the wood itself for this, I think, only cost £3,500. So that means it was an incredibly cheap way of making a staircase, because it was like a sort of kit that got put one on top of another. And also it was a very strong kit. So it was about kind of economy and sort of adding delight to it. And we had to add a lift in, which is added in the corner of the stair tower. That's Monsieur in the lift, because basically it's such a long way up. You don't want to have to carry the shopping all the way to the top floor. So, and also gives you mobility access as well. So when you look up from the bottom of the tower, it looks like it's more stairs than it is, because we use 2 treads per step, because that's the way the thickness of the wood came. And in between them, there was a little piece of plywood just to even out the distances from the available thicknesses we could get, so the stair was the right size. So we get this kind of spiral as we go upwards. And the balusters, which you saw them in the tank earlier, they were reused as the balusters. And we put 2 balusters to each tread. So that was all kind of pre-cut as well. So the balusters were just dropped in and grip filled. And then they were welded at the top by a local guy. And then the kind of plastic handrail was put on the top, like the sort of ones you used to have at school. And the timber, that timber is it's a wire brush. So you can order it wire brushed. So in the stair tower, that's where you kind of experience the timber as you're kind of rising from the top to the bottom. And as you look down, you're then seeing those stairs kind of flaring out, because actually that's how they make a staircase in France. So in Britain, we tend to make a staircase straight, and then in the corner, we put some winders, and then we go straight and then put some winders. But in France, what they tend to do, where Missia comes from, is they tend to kind of spread them out and sort of fan them out in the plan. So it's a much more beautiful way of making a stair, and it's not much nicer to walk up a stair that's like that. So there's the stair from the bottom. So there you see how the building kind of almost, for me, feels like a kind of, it's like a sort of instrument. So Dennis being a photographer, what we tried to do was each one of those spaces gives you a different kind of relationship to nature. So the tank obviously is focused onto the horizon. The roof terrace at the top is obviously focused onto the sky. The bedrooms are focusing onto that kind of barley field, and the tree, there's a cherry tree in front of it too. So they see the sort of changing of the seasons and the changes of that kind of agriculture. And in the bridge, like I said, you look sideways to the kind of sunrise and sunset of the trees. So the building is sort of acting like a kind of instrument of which you appreciate nature. So each one of the spaces we tried to make as distinctly different to each other as possible. In terms of kind of how it works environmentally, the buildings in Yemen, that are in Shabam, that are sort of 8 stories tall, they use the stair as a kind of thermal chimney to kind of cool the whole building. So you open the 2 doors at the bottom you see there, and you open the window at the top, and basically air is drawn up in a kind of thermal chimney, and that you can then suck the air out of the other rooms by doing that. But you can also close all of those vents, and then you keep that hot air. So you can keep the hot air that you've got from the bridge and from every other window that comes through and all the people. And then with the MVHR system, you can bring that back down to the bottom again and feed it back in. So, and on the roof, you can see we had PVs, and actually the building has an air source heat pump. So its environmental credentials are really first class. And it was great to have a client who actually didn't take away those environmental credentials. If anything, they became more extreme as the project went forward. And in the final ramification, they became a kind of very workable solution. So integration engineering did the M&E design. And that was basically a kind of servant-served Khan-esque kind of relationship of the services that came up through the building. So this is the sort of the view from the tank, when you're in the tank with a kind of top light coming through the ceiling. And You see there's a sort of evenness to the light there. And you see the sort of rusty panels are still there. And then this is a shot at night, and that light's obviously going over the field. So that's the last slide. So I don't know if people have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. I'll stop sharing, I guess.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mike.
Pleasure.
Amazing looking building. Got a few questions, really. I mean, the first one is, what was the biggest engineering challenge? You seem to have a load of them there, which you kind of briefly touched upon, but what for you was the biggest engineering challenge?
Well, in a way, you're working with a building that had very little value and was only built to do a utilitarian job, to be a kind of water tower. It just needed to be good at holding water. And actually what we were doing is we're converting that into something that was good to be a kind of very environmentally conscious home. And actually a home needs to be very stable, but a water tank can kind of move around. So I think the stabilization of the building was really important. And the weight of that water is equivalent to a kind of 8-story building. So you can imagine that actually just keeps it stable. But once you remove all that weight, that whole thing just starts moving around. And that's what we had to do. We had to kind of stabilize it with the CLT building in the frame, and then the stair tower at the back doing kind of most of the structural work.
This staircase, I mean, I have to say, looking at it, it looks incredibly vertiginous. I know you mentioned there's a kind of slight kind of an optical illusion going on there with kind of the double tread aspect. How did you make that? I mean, does it clearly meet building regulations, or did you have to kind of work around it?
It more or less meets building regulations. I mean, the top flight, we couldn't do anything about the distances from floor to floor. They were fixed by where the frames were. So we worked very closely with Shore Engineering, who are kind of excellent sort of district surveyors. And actually, the whole sort of English building regs is set about, like I said, just making straight curve. But actually, This is a much more beautiful way to walk up a stair. And so in the end, it was fine with the regulations. And I'm putting the balusters in too. By putting double balusters on each step, we could have put in less, but actually we got them for nothing. They were in the tank. And actually they can compress as you go into the corners and then expand out again, but they never get wider than the 100mm rule. So they comply to the regulations. And they're incredibly strong too, of course, because just dropping them into the wood with a bit of grip fill, that baluster is incredibly stiff.
Did it actually end up being, I mean, I know he bought the thing for £20,000 with the land.
Yeah.
How much did it ultimately cost in terms of per square? I mean, it looks so bespoke. I mean, I know that you kind of like picked elements and you tried to do a lot of prefabrication and stuff, but the final effect is something really quite bespoke, even in your cladding choices. And the idea of recycled aluminium, I mean, you think it's one thing, and in fact, it's something more sophisticated than you initially think. And I think that's how I feel about the whole building. It's highly considered, even though it looks simple. It's highly considered.
Well, I think in a way, Dennis is a photographer, and so photography is all about details. And so he was very fastidious about the details. He had a very kind of green agenda. And because he became a contractor, what you didn't get is that normal thing where the contractor would then start to compromise. Because with Dennis, he did the opposite. He didn't compromise. He helped make it more extreme. So I think that's the beauty of having, working with somebody that closely, who has a kind of interest in actually the building being pushed to an extreme position to make it more bespoke, to him and to Castle Acre.
We have a question here from John Guilfoyle, who says, how are Part B regulations satisfied due to height of build?
I think the building was just under, we were lucky, I think it's less than 15 meters to the top floor. So we were, I can't remember the exact numbers, but, and so it wasn't, and because it's an existing structure, everything was kind of fine. And the construction process, obviously building a tower like that, Dennis had to use an awful lot of kind of cherry pickers, and there was scaffolding all around the building. So during the build, it was basically surrounded by scaffolding, because also the scaffolding was used to stabilize the building while we kind of put in the new stabilized systems to it.
There's another question here that says, is the tank insulated and where was the insulation? I'm assuming it goes on the outside because you've obviously got that kind of...
Yes, so you saw the steel frame there. So the insulation goes on the outside of the steel frame, and then on the outside there, that's just normal Stowe render. But we found a local guy who was willing to make it as smooth as possible to the original color. So yeah, it has, I think, 150 mil of dense insulation, yeah. And then it was quite tricky because the tank is actually separate environmentally. So, and underneath it's all that steel. So there's a insulation on the outside of a tank at one point, and then inside of a tank at the floor. And that was the kind of crucial detail there, was that potential for interstitial condensation at the bottom. So we had to kind of make sure that was the really difficult puzzle to solve with Mervyn, you know, how it worked structurally and how it worked environmentally. And actually then Dennis added, we left a sort of slight gap, and then Dennis put a light down into that detail, which is nice because it adds a little bit of heat to it as well. And the light then uplights for panels.
Well, it's an absolutely intriguing project. I mean, it strikes me as kind of like this kind of bizarre blend of kind of high tech meets steampunk. There's just the quality of that room at the top is quite incredible, really. I mean, they kind of expose, it's like something out of the Nautilus, it feels.
Yeah. Well, that's Dennis. I think all of those things come together in, so to make it special. And that's what, you know, things should be particular to the nature of the place they're in, but the people who make them and the place. And I hope that's what we've tried to do in this case.
Well, I mean, it looks amazing. It's a fantastic project. It's obviously been getting good response from our viewers, and I mean, best of luck with it. It's a wonderful looking thing, absolutely unique and bespoke. Thank you very much indeed for showing it to us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Brown, who is going to talk to us about his Lower Tullochgrue house near Aviemore. We covered this building in the latest issue of RIBA Journal, and its position near the western slopes of Aviemore seems absolutely stunning. It's a rural retreat for a large, multi-generational extended family and pulls together an old family home with open plan living and even a tip of the hat to the Villa Savoie. And to explain that, I'll leave it to Andrew. Are you there, Andrew? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi. Okay.
Take it away.
Sorry, the slight rejig has got me. There we go.
Gets us all.
Well, thanks for asking me to speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Lower Tullochgrue project. I will begin very briefly by saying a little bit about our practice, only in the context of how it's relevant to this project. So we're a small practice. We're based in the Cairngorms National Park, so about just under an hour's drive from where the project is. So we kind of occupy a similar kind of landscape in terms of our own studio as well. And I think that kind of sense of, what it's like to kind of live and work in a place like that that's subject to kind of extremes of whether this is our studio, I think is important for a job like this, both in terms of a live-work balance, but also in terms of understanding what it means to put a building in a landscape like this. So it's, for those of you who don't know, it's just outside Aviemore, which is in northish Scotland. So it's Aviemore is a very touristy kind of town, which you can see in the top left of the aerial photograph. And then the site was an existing farmhouse, which is kind of nestled in amongst an estate that's called Rothy Marcus. So it's one of the only privately owned pieces of land kind of in that area, which I'll go on to talk about a little bit in a minute. So the client wanted to create a holiday home initially, although the long-term plan is that it won't be that, it will become their permanent home. But actually not just for their family, for their wider family as well. So there's actually 3 or 4 family groups that use the house. Sometimes they use them together, sometimes they use them individually. And what they wanted to do was to create a series of spaces that could be used by differing sizes of groups. So the initial brief was to use the existing steading, but the problem that came with that was that it was 3.5 metres lower than the house, about 6 metres away on a slightly jaunty angle. And it was also built of very low quality material in places where you could see through it. And some of those materials were things like concrete blocks. It wasn't all kind of stonework. And a big part of the brief was the client's grandparents' 1960s Ford Falcon that they had shipped over from Idaho, and which they have in Aviemore, or had in Aviemore at the previous house, and used all the time when they were there. It's a classic car. It needs to be kind of coddled in a way. So whilst they do use it, we wanted to kind of bring it into the process a little bit, so that it wasn't, every time they wanted to use it, it wasn't an hour to take it out of the garage and prepare it. So the site itself, is tucked away. I mean, you can't actually see it from the main road really at all, apart from one view, which I'll show in a little minute. And it's a kind of combination of a little farmstead, a traditional house that had been refurbished in the kind of 80s, and then a couple of steadings that had been cobbled together over the years for the most part, some stonework, some block work, some timber, some gaps to the outside. So it was a real kind of hodgepodge. And that is the only place you can see the house from. So as I mentioned before, it sits within Rothiemurchus estate. So it's the kind of anecdotal story we've heard is that a tenant farmer was gifted it upon returning from the Great War. But it's quite difficult to corroborate that. And then that's kind of passed on, through a couple of owners to the current client. So from visiting the site, our first kind of reaction to it was that there's a vista that looks down a track, which we'll see in a little minute. And it was the idea that the house shouldn't block that you should continue to look through that vista if at all possible. So we started to think about the idea of how we could go over that kind of opening through the trees. And we liked the idea of reusing the stonework from the site and trying to create a very solid plinth and then perch something above it that could span over that gap. And we thought that the stonework that was there, we would salvage it all, which we could from the barn, and then place something light above it. So as a concept, we started to think about the idea of treating the steading as a plinth almost by removing its roof and its top. We had to rebuild it slightly more than that, but reusing the stone. But that was the kind of conceptual steps that led us to that point. And it's a very simple plan. It has on a lower floor, it's about services. It's about garages and utility and plant and entrance, and that's more where, if people are out on mucky bikes or kayaking or whatever, that's where they'll enter. Whereas the main entrance for the house is between the old and the new, at a frameless glass link. And then really the new elements are used for social spaces, and the old house is used for kind of cellular bedrooms. Some of that has been rejigged. For the most part, if it wasn't broken, we didn't fix it with regards to the old house. So we created a new master suite kind of out of a kitchen and utility and plant space by adding on a 1.2 metre extension, which you can see at the top of the plan, which we'll look at in a minute. But for the most part with the old house, apart from creating a new stair and the what's to that bedroom, we tried to work with what was there because we could use it as bedroom space. There's also a sustainability aspect to that, not redoing what that doesn't have to be redone. And it's much the same on the first floor of the old house, which we have kept at slightly irregular kind of warren of walls where we have, which we think adds to the character of the house, and just brought the new stair up. And you can start to see there, that's the area that cantilevers out over the track. And the space in the middle has actually been sized by the Ford Falcon, so it sits within that. And it seems very odd, and it's not common for us to plan a project around a car, but it's more the idea that it's very important to the client, and it's the idea that it's something that they use whenever they're at the house, and it just makes that easy for them. And you can see there the kind of organisation of the garage and services below, and then the kind of barn-like structure above. Starting to move on to how the project sits on the site, you can see where it cantilevers across the heavy plinth, and the stool sitting there is in the kitchen and lines up on the axis of the track so that anyone there can see anyone entering the site. And it sits quite comfortably within the kind of topography in the forest setting, we believe. It's we didn't change the topography at all, so we worked with the levels that were already there, which in turn started to generate the levels for the house and the cantilever and the plinth. Material-wise, we worked a lot with an amazing blacksmith who did a lot of kind of blackened stainless steel elements throughout the house. So the way they blacken it is they put a solution on it that makes it pliable for about 8 seconds, and then they work away on it with a tiny little Dremel. So it takes them a very long time. They're just a one-person outfit. So there's that idea of them making something slightly crafted, out of metal for the job. And we started to combine them with stonework. So we reused the stone from the barn that we could. Where we needed more of it, the contractor was actually able to find the quarry that the stone for the house originally came from, which is about 10 miles away. And although it's now closed, they were able to negotiate single time access to it and be able to pick pieces of stone from the same quarry face that the stone originally used in the house came from, which we think gives the project a bit of authenticity. Throughout the house, we used kind of triple glazed internorm windows, which have really high kind of thermal efficiency. We wanted to bring in as much light from the south as we could, although most of the open views are actually to the north. So it was about a balance about providing enough glazing from the south to justify any heat loss to the north side. So that's the falcon there. It would be much better had it been photographed in the space designed for it, but you can't have everything. So that's actually the south elevation of the house. So it starts to show the kind of large glazing that brings in solar gain from that side. And all of the timber came from a local supplier, Rosswood, who many people will know, who we do a lot of projects with, who are actually located about 10 miles from where the job is. So we worked with them to get the specification of the timber right, both on the underside where it's unpainted to all soffits, and also to the main body as well. Moving inside, we liked the idea of creating a barn, which was kind of part of the client's brief, but also we wanted the spaces to have a more human scale than that as well. So we worked with a local company or a stove supplier, for example, and the client could go and see various models so that they could find the correct size of stove, because it's a double-sided unit that serves the living room and the dining as well. And it's really about putting something kind of within that landscape, So obviously, any time that you are doing kind of larger residential works, or any residential works for that matter, it pays to look at renewable heating. So the house, whilst we insulated the old house wherever we could, we insulated the extension to levels far in excess of the building regulations and put in a air source heat pump system because the ground there wasn't suitable for ground source. But because of the size of the house, rather than put in one huge pump, what we actually did was put in 2 pumps that operate in cascade with each other. So when the heating load on the house is low and it's not fully occupied, one pump can just run to run it all. And the system's clever enough to jump between the pumps to ensure that there's not excessive wear. And then once the heating load is higher, if the house is full, say, then both pumps kind of come in a cascade system. And this is just starting to look at some of the internal kind of barn-like spaces that were made. So we chose to expose the structure of the first floor, just to kind of give the space a bit of rhythm to it, because it's a very long space. It's quite difficult to see there, but it's in excess of 20 odd metres long. And we brought a terrace all the way along the north side, which is where the views are. But in order to start to mitigate for the wind and things that comes from that side as well, that was part of the reason that led to the recessed terrace. which just protects that glazed facade from the worst of the elements, and it helps a little bit with heat loss, as well as providing a covered external space that all the spaces, living, dining, kitchen, spill out onto. And then in the old house, where we were trying to do as little as possible, really, because if it's not broken, don't fix it, we added a 1.2 metre deep extension, just a pop out, which meant that an old plant room could be turned into the master bedroom, which just frames a view up the Spey Valley to the north. And I think that a lot of the house is about floor-to-ceiling glazing, and it's very obvious, in a way. And it's nice to have these other spaces that have quite focused views. So, I don't have an image of it, unfortunately, but we turned the old entrance porch for the house into a one-person study that looks, rather than the big vista, it looks towards Cairngorm Mountain and the ski runs. So that idea that you get different types of views from different spaces is something that we thought was really important. And even where you come into the building, which is the glass link between the two, we wanted it to be very minimal. So we used sky frame glazing there, where they could make one pane in a size large enough that it wasn't divided. And we liked that idea that as you come to the site, you look through it rather, and then when you go into the new extension, it's large social spaces that are connected to a terrace. But when you go into the old house, it becomes more about focused views and about a sense of coziness, in particular, in an area that suffers from the weather like this. The local contractor we worked with did a lot of the joinery for us, including this hidden toilet, which I included because it appeals to my own particular sense of humour, which the client wanted to operate by a book, which you can see on the bottom shelf there, Trump Art of the Deal, which you pull forward on a hinge and it activates a cable mechanism and lets you into the toilet. And we wanted to bring out aspects of the client's personality and things like this. So that was something that they really wanted to explore. So everyone worked together to kind of bring it together in quite a successful but also slightly humorous way. I'll also just play a short film here, which another client of ours who's a filmmaker made about the project. So that was quite an interesting experience, to see their take on it as a client themselves. Thank you. And like I said, that film was made by another client of ours, which we find quite interesting. So they had quite a unique perspective as we're working on their project at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Looks like a great place, absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's hard to read about. I mean, you've been gifted a landscape there. So the idea that the house kind of really, in a sense, and what I quite like about that the house really is a sense of restraint to it, that actually it just lets the landscape really talk. And I think that sometimes architects can kind of get rather overawed with their own intervention in a sense. And I like the way that this house is actually very restrained in its landscape.
I mean, you actually can't see the house, the new parts from anywhere in the public realm at all, you know, so which was really important to us. So there was a lot of assessment of the views and things even from private roads and things to make sure that you couldn't really see what we were going to do.
I mean, obviously that must have worked well with you in terms of how it kind of went through planning. I mean, how easy was it for you to get the building through?
Worryingly easy would be the phrase. It's
how encouraging.
I mean, we actually find the Cairngorms National Park a really open-minded place to make buildings, to be honest. You know, so they're quite a forward-thinking planning department. But no, the planning was actually no issue, you know, at all. I wish I could say it would be more of a story, but it was worryingly simple. And so, I mean, we put together a very comprehensive package of showing visuals from different places in the public realm, and you know, it's showing almost that you couldn't see the building, you know. And also, I think working with the existing levels and the way we were going to respect the materiality of the site and things, I think was planners as well.
I mean, you mentioned, you know, it seems to me like there was no expense spared on this place. I mean, you've got sky frame glazing there. You've got this kind of like double cascade, what do you call it? Cascade system of air source heat pumps. I mean, was it an expensive house to produce ultimately, or
per metre squared, it was pretty standard, actually, I would say. I mean, the thing with the cascade heat pumps is it's only marginally more expensive than going for a large one. But it was more that it's more fitting in terms of running costs and things, you know, in the future. And because we used the sky frame, we only used it for the places that required it, really. We used Internorm for the rest of it, and that was driven by performance rather than cost.
We have a question here from Nathan Craig, who says, what was your relationship with the structural engineer, as the structural elements look very lightweight and elegant? My experience with structural engineering is that it can be somewhat heavy-handed in their solutions.
Yeah, the engineer was fantastic, actually. I mean, we do a lot of projects with the same company, so we have a great relationship with them. We like to push them, and they are really kind of responsive to that. So we pushed that column, for example, the kind of cantilever column, as far as we could, to the point that they started to beg us to not make it any smaller. And they were right. In perspective and composition, it's the right kind of size. But I think having that relationship with them really allowed us to get something elegant from it.
We have a question from Julie Richards saying, do you use the same contractor on your projects as the build quality and details look immaculate on the building?
We don't. It depends where the projects are. I mean, at the moment we're working from Orkney down to Somerset, so it's very difficult to work with the same contractor. But we do work with that contractor on several projects. They're building house for us at the moment, and they are excellent. And I think their attention to detail and the working relationship with them really is what allows us to be a little bit freer in our detailing, knowing that we can achieve things through working with them. They've got a great team, and we were attracted to them because they had built a house that won the Grand Designs House of the Year a couple of years ago, you know, and that kind of thing. And we've developed a working relationship with them now that's very fruitful.
She also asks, can you comment on the glass balustrades, please? Interestingly, because I'm actually more interested in the metalwork ones, but there was a level of opacity to them, isn't there?
It was frost. when they were taking when the photographer went to the site, it was about -14.
Oh, right. Okay. Because it just looks like you've got a kind of because I was thinking, why have you made them frosted?
No, it's, I did ask that afterwards, but she had been there for 3 days waiting for the weather to warm up, and eventually just had to take a photograph of the frozen balustrade. But
oh my God, that's incredible! It actually looks like that's how you installed them. Because I was going to say, oh, it's interesting that you've actually prevented the view. You know, what was the idea behind that? But clearly not.
I mean, this past winter was very hard. I mean, at the end of the job, we got down to -24 one day. you know. So, but it was -12 consistently when she was trying to photograph it, unfortunately.
A question here from Emma Mosley, who says, did you look into the possibility of using solar panels on the roof of the extension?
We did, yeah. We looked into it with the renewables company that we work with quite a lot. It was actually solar slates that we were thinking about using. And the way it worked out was that the battery systems that they would have needed in order to work with them were punitively expensive, and it was contributing very little to the overall running cost savings for the house. So again, it was about adding the right amount of renewables for the client, if we could, and just finding that sweet spot that they're happy to do it, but that we can get the things that we want in it to help with the performance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it looks great. I mean, it's a fantastic project, very beautiful. When did it complete, actually? How long did it take to build?
It was December.
Okay.
Just December just passed, and then into January they started to be able to use the house, but lockdown is that slightly.
Well, looks absolutely stunning. Congratulations on the successful execution of that project.
Thanks very much.
We need to move on. Thanks a lot, Andrew. We need to move on. Hopefully Frederick is there second time round. Are you there, Frederick?
I hope so, Carl.
Hello,
can you hear me?
hello. Sorry, we had to kind of like move on swiftly because we're getting problems with your microphone. Are you there?
All good. I'm there.
You're there,
and I
good.
can hear you
Excellent.
loud and clear. I hope you can as well.
Yes, we can.
That's good. That's good. Yes. Cool. Thank you very much for the introduction, Carlos, before, and sorry, all of you, for the inconvenience. I will just share my screen. Here we go. And then hopefully this will work out beautifully. Can you let me know whether you can see the screen, Carl? Cool.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Can see it. Yeah.
Good. My name is Frederick, and I've been in Velux for 9 years. Velux being the roof window company, well known to many architects. I've done various elements in Velux, everything from selling blinds and shutters in the Baltics to doing marketing and product management in Spain. And 2 years ago, I helped start up the Velux Group's bespoke glazing products, which is called Vario by Velux. You know that Velux is heavily founded on rather traditional sizes, at least. But of course, we also want to bring in the Velux quality, the Velux reliability into the bespoke product market. We launched 2 years ago in GBI, and today I won't talk a lot about Vario by Velux. I will touch upon it in the end. But firstly, I will describe a project for you, which is a project very dear to me for 2 reasons. One of them is that there is a heavy consideration on how to incorporate light in the building and in the renovation of this 1930s house. And second of all, because it's my own house. I thought it was interesting to bring a project which is personal to me, instead of bringing one of the many houses that we've done across GBI over the last 2 years. I thought it would be interesting to share a Danish case with you guys. So this is the house in question. This is the house my wife, my 2 kids, and I fell in love with approximately 1.5 years ago. We completely renovated the house, and it took roughly 8 months. The house is an architect house from 1935, designed by a Danish architect called Svend Ritum. And Svend Ritum was the apprentice of Arne Jacobsen, whom some of you might know, as he is probably the most famous Danish architect of all time. The house on the right-hand side of this photo is actually an Arne Jacobsen house, which has been standing there since 1932. To begin with, I would like to share a video just explaining the full journey of of the renovation project. Hi.
Hi.
Come on in. Daylight is a funny element. It's really intangible, and it's difficult to understand what daylight does to your home. My name is Fredrik Gerding. I am the director for Vario by Velux, the Velux Group's bespoke roof light range. We bought this house a year ago. It's a 1935 architect house by a Danish architect called Svend Risum. We instantaneously fell in love with the house because it has so many levels in the floor plan. We had to remove walls to create open living dining spaces to accommodate a modern family. And the new kitchen dining area had to be bright and uplifting.
We knew that the kitchen would be situated towards the north, so we knew that we needed to get some light into this part of the room in order to make it a nice space to stay in.
Me being a window guy, roof lights were an obvious choice. But I also have to admit that I had to do some convincing to my wife, at least.
Well, I obviously married a very committed window man, and I was, a little bit more hesitant. Looking at it today, it's probably one of the best decisions that we have made. The natural daylight, you simply can't compete with that.
It's the heart of the home, and it's where we spend all our time.
And it's nice that the girls can be here and they can sit at the kitchen counter and do their homework or drawings. I'm still a part of whatever they're doing.
Walking in the front door, you see that magnificent hallway, which is quite astonishing, I think.
We decided to paint the ceiling light blue because we wanted to pull in the sky into the house, and I think it gives an amazing effect when looking up.
And it's where the stairwell is, both towards the upper floors and the lower floors. So what we wanted to create there was kind of a light well penetrating all 3 stories of the building with natural daylight.
I think this house would be a completely different house if we hadn't implemented the roof lights. The 5th wall that you have in the ceiling is as important as any other wall in the house.
Yes, that was a video explaining about the entire renovation project that my family and I have undertaken together with a very committed architect and a builder managing the entire process. When we set out to make this renovation, we knew that we had to change the overall floor plan and the look of the house in order to make it fit a modern family like ours. Nothing had really been done to the house for 40 years, 50 years almost, in the 70s. And we had 4 guiding principles. One of them was create open living spaces to accommodate all the modern way of living. And also add plenty of daylight, because the house had been really well thought through in terms of how to position the house in terms of the orientation. But we decided to build further on that. We also were very focused on energy efficiency. The house was really poorly insulated. The heating source was not sufficient. So we needed to put in an air source heat pump. And we also wanted to add more space. In the lower part of the building consists of 4 stories with the center stairwell connecting all 4 stories. And the lower part of the building, the lower floor, is actually partially below ground, but yet with facade windows providing a lot of daylight. But we wanted full head height there, so we had to stick out and create further foundation in order for the building to stay structurally sound. This was the hallway we were greeted by when moving into the house. And there are many elements to this hallway which are really great. For me, at least, I really like the fact that all 4 stories of the building, if we look on where the door is, underneath there, we have a really deep basement. So actually 4 stories connected really nicely with the hall. And you're greeted by a daylight from above here, which has a small wooden frame around it, and it had frosted panes in it. So you got a diffused light, which was really popular back in the days, had some sort of Bauhaus architecture related to it. But we, of course, wanted to update this, and what we got out of it was a more modern living space. We had the possibility to add a vario roof light, which is one piece of glass spanning 2.5 meters times 1, and providing that light well throughout the stories in the building. We chose to paint the walls, the doors, and everything on the four walls, vertical walls, in a soothing beige. So we heard about color drenching. I think it gives a really nice and clear soothing atmosphere in the hallway. And then the light blue ceiling, which kind of draws in the sky, which resembles what you look at when you look outside, were 2 of the features here. If we then move on to the living room we moved into, with a really traditional fireplace from the 1930s in Denmark. We have the modern interpretation of a stucco, which is kind of rounded, which was really popular around that time, less romantic than normal stuccos or older stuccos. But of course, we also wanted to widen this space and make it more both spacious and have more daylight in the area. So we knocked down the bearing wall or the structural wall going across the entire house, and then opened up into the narrow kitchen on the other side, which is north facing. So we knew that with the partitioning wall being relatively close and trees growing, we knew that we wouldn't get a lot of light into that area if we weren't opening up to the sky. So we put in a large roof light there, which is, of course, I would like to say openable. It is 2.5 square meters of glass in one piece, which is openable with a Velox Active system on it, which controls the indoor climate, and also, of course, a rain sensor if we forget to close the window when going grocery shopping or the like. We tend to open the window every morning when we come down, and it's a really nice effect to go down into a clean and aired out space. If we take another direction in the living room, this was how it used to be. There were nice features with opening doors directly out to a patio in the which is south facing. And there was a large facade window, but still it was dark because of the narrow space. So we also updated that by creating the kitchen dining area as an open plan space, but also maintained some of the elements that were important to us as we had chosen to renovate a relatively old building instead of what some would probably have done, remove it and build something new. We decided to maintain some of the historical elements, for example, the stucco or the built-in bookcase that we then updated. If we move on to the kitchen, a really traditional 70s, 80s kitchen in Denmark. It is really narrow. Back in the days, the house was built with a hatch here where you could serve the food to the guests sitting on the other side of this wall, because obviously you didn't make your food yourself, but that didn't really fit to our way of living. So we chose to open it up. You'll notice here that the roof light isn't here. We have covered the roof light with blankets in this photo, and then made the hole, rendered the hole into a ceiling, in order to replicate how it would look if we hadn't gone for a roof light in this space. Because of course we get a lot of facade light from the left-hand side, and you could argue that this is fairly well lit, but we knew that it was north-facing, and we knew that we wouldn't get too much heat. We would get this bluish diffused light from the north by adding a roof light, which kind of smoothens everything out and gives a magnificent effect to our kitchen area. We also added solar cells, which turned out relatively nice, I would say, in combination with the roof lights. And that's the final roof plan. For me, daylight and ventilation was ultra important, because in Velux, we know that Europeans spend 90% of their time indoors, and 2/3 of that time is spent in their home. It's probably a lot more now post-COVID than it was. This data is pre-COVID. And that calls for having great, healthy living spaces with magnificent ventilation and also daylight. Looking back at the circadian rhythm, the natural daylight is an important instrument to kind of navigate our body into morning time, midday time, and nighttime. If we then look at the ventilation effect of roof lights versus facade lights only, then in Velux we talk about cross ventilation, where you use multiple facade windows to kind of get an airflow through the house, which can be really nice, but the most efficient way, we saw it with the water tower, is actually to create a stack effect where you open a facade window, and then with the warm air rising and the reducing pressure in the base draws the heat out of the room, and you will actually be able to ventilate a home in 5 to 10 minutes if the pressure is right. And it's really important when talking about indoor air quality and indoor comfort that we also look at some of the elements as pollutants, mold, dust. A lot of it we bring in as human beings with materials, with toys for kids, with carpets, with paint, etc. And we need to air that out. And the most efficient way to do it is through the stack effect. In the UK, 42% of all architect fees originate from one-off new home or extension conversion projects each year. That's a relatively large portion of the architect's portfolio. And with 70% of European households, including GPI and UK, reportedly being able to offer or afford a stage renovation or building project, it is really important that architects and manufacturers play a crucial role in balancing or rebalance towards healthier homes with daylight and ventilation. The Velux Group is known for our standardized products, which have been on the market for 80 years this year, a really reliable and quality product. But we wanted to bring in a playfulness with a lot of possibilities and combinations to the Velux product portfolio. And that was launched in the UK 2 years ago. And we have a website where you will be able to configure your products yourself and see a real-time price of the products, and also be able to, of course, talk to our daylight designers and sales specialists sitting in GPI. We also have various tools specifically for architects. We have an architect suite with all the tools, the educational material, etc. And of course, we also have a RIBA-approved CPD that we would love to share with you if that would be interesting. Thank you.
Much indeed, Frederick. Lovely house, well done. Hoping you got roof lights discounted.
Yeah, not a lot. We're not good at that in Velux, to be honest. But I knew I would happen anyhow.
We have one question here from Juliet McDonald. We have to finish up now, but she asks, how does the air source heat pump work in an old 1930s house? The Velux Vario keep the property airtight, but how was the rest of it kept airtight enough for the air source heat pumps to work? You obviously had retrofit insulate the building, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know how common it is in GBI actually, but with these brick walls, we tend to have a gap in between, and we can put infill, kind of an insulation material that you pump into the gap between the walls. And that was done all around the house, which provides a lot of insulation, all glazing, both the facade elements and the roof lights are triple glazed products. And then we also added further insulation in between the stories. So a lot was done in terms of the energy efficiency.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much indeed for the presentation. Great looking building. Thank you. It must be lovely to live in and very warm by the looks of it.
Thank you.
It just leaves me to thank everybody. We're running 15 minutes late. I'm actually doing fairly well as it goes. It has been up to 40. So thank you everybody for bearing with me. I would just like to briefly thank our architect presenters, Sally Storey with her Inspired by Light book, Andrew Brown, Tara Gbolade and Mike Tonkin, who all gave their time generously. And for our sponsors, Simon Hutchison of Painted Paper Library, Will Wigfield from Rockwool, and Frederick Geerding, who you've just heard from Velux. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you for staying with us. Apologies if there were any technical problems at the beginning, but I hope you enjoyed looking at the projects, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from our sponsors. We will be convening next month, I believe it's sustainability, and I look forward to speaking to you all then. Thank you very much indeed, and good morning.